Fair warning. I'm not going to try to avoid spoilers, but I'm not diving too deep into story details. Anything spoiled will be relatively early in the game. Before we really get started, let's take a moment and just enjoy a clip from the opening cinematic and a taste of the music like what's playing in the background now. I didn't really let a whole lot of the cinematic play because I want you to sort of save as much of this experience for yourself as possible, but let's just dive into it. So, Clair Obscur, or Expedition 33, is the best turn-based RPG that I've played in years. Another name for it would be a JRPG, but since this was made in Japan, a lot of the times people are kind of dropping the JRPG thing off of it and just referring to it as turn-based. It's a pretty bold statement to say that it's the best one that I've played in a long time, so let's kind of dive into it. My personal taste when it comes to turn-based RPGs are things like Final Fantasy VIII, Octopath Traveler, and Legend of Dragoon. Those are a couple of examples of some of my favorite ones. A lot of them from quite a while back. Octopath Traveler being a little bit more recent. It's had some sequels and spin-off series. So the Switch has been a pretty decent source for modern JRPGs, but there's not really too many on the scale of Expedition 33 like Expedition 33 itself. Legend of Dragoon is probably my favorite JRPG of all time, and that's going to be really relevant later in the video.
Don't tell your sister though.
So, Clair Obscur takes us back to the days of high production, deep storytelling, and tactical turn-based combat that was really last exemplified by pretty much any Final Fantasy from about 1 to 10, recognizing the fact that as the number increased, the games got successively easier. Though realistically, one of the sort of easy criticisms of turn-based RPGs is that for a long time, or for most of them, even as far as I'm aware within this game, if you overlevel or really farm things out, you can make your characters super overpowered so they don't really stay difficult for very long. Now granted, this game actually has multiple difficulty settings, so you can, in fact, make it difficult again, but that's one of the fun things about JRPGs is becoming overpowered. So, Clair Obscur definitely leans into that in the late game.
I know what you need.
One of the things that stands out about this game is that turn-based has almost been completely abandoned in the modern era in favor of more Western-style RPGs like Skyrim. And I actually think Skyrim was the game that started that trend away from it. If you look at some of the interviews with Japanese developers around that time, there was a good number of them, including people at Square, that actually thought that this was sort of the progression that RPGs were going to go in. More active combat, less turn-based. So let's take a moment and just sort of jump back to a little section of that opening cinematic and really kind of look at the tone for the game. So in this opening shot, there's a lack of action, but just the visuals convey a lot very quickly. You see a sort of Paris, and I say sort of because, as you see in the game, it's not quite what you think it is, that not only has been devastated, but has some clearly odd shit going on. There's gravity-defying rocks and just an overall sinister tone to the image that it presents. In other words, you know this isn't a happy world. Fair warning, the story is dark. There's plenty of levity in the game, but the overarching story is a very dark one. I don't think it's quite as doom-filled as something like Attack on Titan, but, well, you'll get a sample of that at the end of the video. So after the opening shot, you jump into what is a relatively normal interaction between two of the main characters. They're referencing something called a grammage, and the event that happens that day. But you're mainly focused on finding your ex, and seemingly making amends with her. Oh, and you have a robot arm, and jump into combat tutorial like you're seeing play out right now. The game doesn't shove narrative down your throat. It isn't force-feeding you every detail of the world, rather it is letting the events happen and filling in the blanks in a very organic way. In other words, there's not a lot of exposition dumping going on via dialogue. I think a lot of the older RPG developers got into the habit of needing to put dialogue up to explain backstory and current events due to system limitations, so thinking like early Final Fantasy games, so Super Nintendo era, even into the like Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation and early PlayStation eras. So games like Final Fantasy 16, which are newer and don't have those same system limitations, still seem to carry on the trend of over-explaining the story via dialogue. I think it's just a habit they didn't drop as systems progressed and those limitations went away. There's a solid chunk of this game, however, where you're going to be just as confused about what's going on as the characters are. Or really, even if they know more than you, they're not just saying it without there being a reason to, because all the characters pretty equally know what's going on. Why would they be explaining things to each other? So the only time it really gives any sort of expository dialogue is when there's actually good reason to do so. So, very solid writing. But, that being said, aside from the gorgeous visuals and the good story, the combat is probably the thing that this game does the best. Absolutely love Legend of Dragoon, to the point where I would love to see a remake of it come out, just not like Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is a good game, but it's more of a reimagining. I want to actually see Legend of Dragoon keep its essence. And that essence of what made Legend of Dragoon so interesting and fun is actually very heavily present in Clair Obscur.
You never got over her. Why'd you wait until today to say something?
So, the active combat is what I'm talking about. In Legend of Dragoon, you had to do button prompts for every single attack. And you'd build it up, and every new combo that you unlocked had a new set of button prompts. In Clair Obscur, you actually have button prompts for every different attack in the game.
I'll be here for you.
You also have button prompts to do things like dodge, parry, and later in the game, jump. Now, they're a little bit more complex than the ones that were popping up in Legend of Dragoon because it does some really interesting things. Like, for example, there's one skill, I'm not going to name whose, so read your skills carefully, but there's one skill that I can think of where if you mess up the button prompts, it actually has a chance to sort of backfire on you and hurt you instead of the enemies. There's also an accessibility option that lets you auto-complete all of the active combat inputs except for parries, dodges, and jumps, I think. I don't think it auto-completes those for you. So if you really don't want to do the active part of the combat, you can go in and turn that on, and honestly, probably after another 10 or 20 hours, I'm going to end up turning that on and just dealing with the dodges and parries myself. But it's fun for now, and I'm sure it'll continue to be fun for a long time. But if you really don't like that aspect, you can turn that off. And as long as you're not playing on the hardest difficulty, the parrying is not 100% necessary. So let's just talk about that for a moment. You aren't just dropped into combat with zero explanation. You saw the quick tutorial from earlier. There's actually a couple more tutorial options and tutorial chances in the prologue where you can really practice the combat system with no real penalty. Although to be fair, even later in the game when you die, it only takes you back to the previous autosave, and it saves pretty frequently. So you're usually not losing massive amounts of progress if you do die. And you can go back and redo the battle pretty quickly. It doesn't really hold that against you super well. There's a few places where like story beats, say there's one fight in the prologue here where if you lose it, it just automatically progresses. But you can go back and redo the fight. It's just a practice fight.
It's nice to know something of us will repent.
The big thing to focus in on, though, is how it actually teaches you how to do the combat. The button prompts for the attacks are pretty self-explanatory. You get a little square on screen, and you just have to learn the different patterns for them. But dodging, parrying, and jumping are a little bit trickier. The game's very clever about it, though. What it does is dodging is significantly easier to do than parrying. So you get a much wider window to dodge, but there's no real bonus to dodging other than you just don't take damage. What can happen, though, is if you dodge at just the last minute, you get what's called a perfect dodge. Just so happens,
Sometimes
not coincidentally, that the timing for a perfect dodge is exactly the same as the timing for a parry.
Look at her.
So what you can do is you can actually go into fights with new enemies,
Sad.
start out just dodging to learn what their attacks look like and see what the timing would be, and when you start hitting perfect dodges, you can actually start subbing in and doing parries.
Only you could choose empathy
Now,
at a moment like this.
why would you want to do a
It's one of the
parry
few
instead of a
choices I can
dodge?
make.
Well,
I couldn't do it.
if you successfully parry the last hit of a combo, and it's the last hit for that character, like let's say an attack is actually hitting multiple characters and it's just switching targets. If you parry the last hit it would do, and it's the first hit on a particular character, it'll still count this, but normally from what I've seen, if there's a combo chain pulled off and you fail to parry one of them, you don't get the counter. But if you do parry all the hits, you get the counter, and the counters do a massive amount of damage. So learning how to parry benefits you because it makes fights go much faster. However, it's not absolutely necessary. If you really don't like the pressure of doing parries, the window for dodges is very generous, to the point where you can kind of mess it up, and if you hit it again fast enough, generally you're going to be okay. So dodges are a gentle way of working you into it, learning the system, and then you can transition over to parries, which give you a much bigger benefit. So the more familiar you get with the game, the more you can actually milk out of it in terms of damage and other interactions. Now, the best part of this system is realistically, if you really just have a hard time with it, as long as you can at least learn how to dodge, you'll be fine. So, at the end of the day, you can figure out a way to play your way. But one really cool thing about this is that, as far as I've seen, there's no fight in the game where you actually have to take damage. Sure, there's a few that I just haven't done yet. Either I've not gotten to them or they're hidden super bosses where there's some sort of unavoidable damage mechanic, but as far as I can tell, there's nothing that you cannot avoid. There's another means of keeping you from fighting everything too early. Like, there are a few bosses, from what I understand, from what I've seen, where they have mechanics that slowly escalate. In other words, soften rages. But as long as you're very careful, most enemies in the game, even ones that are a little bit harder than what you think you should be able to take on, are doable with a little bit of timing and some practice. So, now, I've basically said what I wanted to say. I'm really enjoying this game, so much so that I decided to put other videos I had in mind on hold to make a video discussing Clair Obscur and talking about how much fun I'm having with it. And that realistically, if you've been really wanting a good JRPG that's meaty, has a great combat system, has good exploration, which I really couldn't showcase in this video without giving spoilers, but you can explore quite a bit. In case I didn't mention it, there is actually an overworld, like in old school Final Fantasies, and every area that you explore actually has areas worth exploring. Like, there's a main path that you can stick to and just beat the area, or you can actually go off on the side and get rewarded with things like items that are actually useful rather than just being random side items. But if you've really been longing for that type of game, an old school JRPG, well, this French produced game is probably the closest thing to it that you're going to get, and hopefully it's been so well received and it's so good that we're going to actually see a sort of new renaissance of this style game. Anyway, I'm going to let the video finish out by playing the cinematic that transitions you from the prologue to the first chapter. I've skipped a bunch of the story beats in the prologue, so you'll still have plenty to see in the prologue if you play through the prologue. Like, you're probably wondering how I got to the point where my character's in the uniform it is in the fight showing in the background right now. Well, there's quite a bit of things that happen between the last clip from the opening area to this area. But I'm going to let this cinematic play out, because if by the time you've watched it, you're not hooked and don't want to see what else is going to happen, then you're not going to be hooked for the game. But anyway, if you don't want to be spoiled and you're already sold on the game, I'd stop now and save that cinematic as something you get to experience in-game. Otherwise, if you don't really care about spoilers, or you're just not really terribly interested yet, keep watching. It might change your mind. If it doesn't, at the very least, it might interest you in hunting someone down that's doing a Let's Play. So, in other words, thank you for watching. Have a good night, and remember, if I can beat it, so can you.
Expeditioners. The Sword of Lumiere. We honor your dedication. We do not take for granted that you dedicate your final year of life to keeping hope alive for all of Lumiere. Some of you are leaving to change the world. Others to discover the secrets of our universe. Some to protect loved ones. Others to find meaning in our all-too-short lives. As you sail into the unknown, know that Lumiere stands with you. When you battle the Paintress, know that Lumiere fights with you. Let the stones of her monolith crumble. Let her body lie at the end of the world. Unable to paint another death, let the stars no longer be hidden by her oppressive silhouette. Let the world once again watch the sun rise without the shadow of her cursed figure. May the wind of renewal take you to the ends of the earth. Tomorrow comes. Thanks to you. Expedition 33.
Clair Obscur.
Get ready. You're old. How did you survive the Gomage? Which expedition are you from? Fall back! need to go! He's not following. Putain! What the fuck? Who the fuck was that?
Merde! What do we do now?
Regroup at the rally point. The Indigo Tree.
Fuck! Run! Come on! Move! Fucking snap out!